over from Holland.
Okay, today is June 8th, 1984. This is Joe Todd, interview with Lillian Cronkite. Ma'am, where were you born?
Cumberland Gap, Tennessee.
And when's your birthday?
October 5th, 1905.
1905. Okay. Who was your father?
Edgar Poe Clark.
And your mother?
Was Virginia Ann Treece.
T-R?
E-E-C-E.
Okay. Where were they from?
They were born and reared in Cumberland Gap, Tennessee. So.
What kind of work did your father do?
Well, he was a farmer and he was also a merchant. Had a little general store. And the family always had the little rural general stores in Tennessee where we were. Usually the post office in the same store.
How long did you live in Tennessee?
Well, we came to Oklahoma when I was, we came first when I was just an infant. And then we stayed a year and went back to Tennessee and then came in 1907, then came back out here in 1911. I've lived here since then in Lane County.
Yeah. How come your folks came to Oklahoma?
Well, really for my mother's health.
Did she have TB or?
No, but she had used to have lots of respiratory problems, and they were afraid that she might develop it because it was so damp and cold back here. So. And my father had 4 brothers and 2 sisters that had come out here ahead of him, and that's the reason they came here, older brothers and sisters.
Any of them make the land run?
No, none of us made the land run.
Okay. Do you remember the trip out here in 1911?
Very clearly.
Tell me about it.
When we left Tennessee, I recall my father's brother lived close to where we were living with my mother's parents, Treece, grandparents, and he came in a lumber wagon with 2 spray seats on it. We loaded the family and all the baggage we were to bring along with us, trunks and what have you, into this lumber wagon. And it was raining. And we drove down to a little town nearby to Arthur, Tennessee. There's a railroad station there. And got onto the train there. And I said that I can recall so clearly because our tears were kind of falling with that, with the rain, and to hear that old railroad whistle, train whistle, it was the most lonely feeling. And I said I still have that same feeling of that little 5-year-old girl when I hear a train whistle. So, but it took us 2 days and 2 nights on the train with my parents and brother, older brother, and 2 sisters, younger than I. They came.
Did you hire an immigrant car to come out? Did you hire an immigrant car?
No,
Okay.
no. We just brought, just the essential things.
Okay.
Just our personal belongings.
Where'd you sleep on the train?
We just curled up and slept on the seats, I'm sure, because there were no, no Pullman facilities on it. So. And Mother had packed lunches. We brought lunches and we ate on the train.
And where'd you get off the train?
At Watonga.
At Watonga.
Mm-hmm.
How big was Watonga?
I really don't know, but I'd say maybe it could have been 2,000 people. I don't know really the size of it.
What did the town look like?
Dirt streets, horses and buggies, and you didn't see any cars. It was had hitching posts in the street to tie up your team while you shopped.
Who were some of the prominent people here at that time?
Well, I'm sure like the Fergusons had been here, and he'd already served as governor, see, when we came back the last time. And then there was a dry goods store, the Wagner store, and this Cleveland Kelly that you're to talk to, that was his family. So they were, he'll know more about some of the business things here. And then there was McBride's store, and this Dr. Earl McBride, the city grew up here, and he was one that grew up here too. So that, and Munger's had a hardware store. And then there were a number of other just meat markets and local stores, but those were the leading larger stores.
Okay. When did they pave the streets in Watonga?
I'd say in 1930 sometime.
Probably,
wasn't it?
because I remember.
Were they brick or?
No, they were dirt.
Dirt.
I can remember we come to town on Saturday afternoon and they had a wagon drawn by horses with sprinklers on the back, and they'd sprinkle the streets to keep the dust down.
And there was a
Water tank
right in the middle of the street and
Uh-huh.
everything.
To water your horses. So,
When did you start school?
at a little rural school out east of Watonga.
What was the name of it?
It was Plainview was the
Plainview.
name of it. Plainview School is no longer in existence.
How many students were there when you were going?
Oh, I'd say 15 or 20 probably, because it was all grades. Beginners.
Who was your teacher?
It was Weltha Phillips. W-E-L-T-H-A, Weltha Phillips.
How did one teacher teach all grades?
It wasn't easy. But she seemed to, and of course, there were some young men in that class that were nearly as old as the teacher, I'm sure. At that time, she had to see all grades.
When you first moved to Watonga, where did you live?
Well, we lived out east of Watonga, about 10 miles east.
What kind of house you lived in?
A little 2-roomed house, and with our family of 6 people. Drew water from a cistern with a bucket.
Did your father buy the place out there?
No, the place we lived on when we first came here belonged to my father's brother. We lived on his farm when we first came here. And later we moved to north of Watonga, bought a place.
Did your brother buy a relinquishment there or on a claim?
Well, now, some of them did, I'm sure.
Okay.
Some of them.
As a little girl, what kind of chores you do around the farm?
Well, the main thing was like bring in kindlings, like cobs and kindling to start the fire, and carry in the wood for the next morning's fire building, and then just help mother around the house, whatever we could help with.
About like laundry and...
Well, we didn't, see, that was nearly all done with a washboard and a tub of hot water.
Did you do the laundry?
Not very much of it, I'm afraid.
What about cooking?
Well, I used to help cook some, but not a whole lot. We didn't have very much to waste, so we didn't experiment much. It was done conservatively.
What is the difference between washwood and stove wood?
Washwood.
Yeah.
Never heard of washwood.
I've heard-
Water maybe you're thinking about.
I heard people would go and get wood for the fire, and certain wood was for washwood and certain wood was for...
Well, maybe they built fires out in the yard and heated their water in those big iron kettles, and they would, some wood that would stack under that. So, but
What chore did you like the least?
I think.
Did you know Governor Ferguson?
I did not know him. I know my father did, but I didn't know him. And I didn't know Mrs. Ferguson until after she had retired.
Yeah, okay. Tell me about World War I in Watonga. Was there any effort, work to support the war effort?
Oh, well, like the Red Cross and all this, and then even the children helped with, we'd knit washcloths and things, and then knit sweaters and things for the soldiers, and scarves for them to wear and so forth. But during the war years, I lived at Eagle City. We didn't live in Watonga. We lived at Eagle City.
Where's Eagle City?
Well, it's a ghost town now, but it's about 20 miles northwest.
Okay. How come you moved up there?
Well, my father bought a farm up there, and then later he bought a grocery store in Eagle City and ran that for a good many years.
Was it just a farming town?
Yes.
How big was it?
Oh, I really have no idea. It was and maybe as many as 200 people.
And it's now a ghost town.
Yes, there are a number of people that are coming back there and moving in house trailers. Young people that have grown up there and they're retired and came back. And so they have, just quite a number of people back there now, but there's no town, no store, no post office, no anything.
Okay. 1920s.
Well, that was, I was in high school in the 1920s at Eagle City, and I graduated with the first class that Eagle City High School ever graduated.
What year was that?
1924.
1924. Were there many flappers in this area in the 20s?
We all were flappers.
What is a flapper?
Well, I don't know exactly, only that we just tried to do what we saw in the paper that the flappers were doing. So I don't know exactly how to describe one, only it was just a young lady that liked to have fun, I think, good clean fun.
Did you bob your hair?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
What did your father say when you bobbed your hair?
Well, he didn't like it very well.
You have a car back then, in the 20s?
Well, not till, about in 22 or 3, we got a Model T Ford, so touring car.
What kind
Hey,
of
that helps.
What kind of crops did you raise on the farm?
Just some wheat and corn and maize for the livestock. And then we had, always had a big garden, and usually a nice fruit orchard, so that we lived at home.
You ever work out in the fields?
I never did.
What about wheat harvest time?
Well, at times when I was, I'd say in the 20s, I used to help some of the farm ladies around that were cooking for thrashing crews. That was only summertime work that we schoolgirls had. We'd help these ladies cook for the thrashing crews.
How many men are in a thrashing crew?
Well, there would sometimes be 15 or 20, and then a lot of times there'd be neighbors that would come in and help to haul the bundles and this kind of things too. So,
what kind of food would you cook for the thrashing crews?
well, usually they would have some kind of meat. Lots of times chicken in the summertime. Everybody grew their own chickens, and then we always had home baked bread, and usually home-baked pies and cakes, and then all homegrown vegetables, and they fed them well. And 3 meals a day.
Right.
Get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and start breakfast because the men were out getting their horses ready to go to the field feeding them, and then they ate early.
How long did it take to thrash the wheat on your place?
Well, it would depend on the, if they didn't have any breakdowns or anything. It went pretty fast. It wasn't too many days, the actual thrashing part. But now, see, they had to cut the wheat before and shock it, and they had so that took quite a long time, and if they had rain, of course, that delayed things too.
How many different pieces of equipment did they have in wheat harvest?
Well, they had, well, like usually binder that bound the wheat, and then they had old hay racks that they hauled the wheat, but they shocked that, and the shocks in the field, the bundles in little shocks all over the field. So that took quite a long time just to do that. And then when the thrashing crew came, then they'd have to haul this with wagons and teams to the thrashing machine.
What does a header do?
Well, a header cuts wheat just like your combine of today.
Okay.
But they were later something than the binder, and more people use the binder, but we do have a picture of a crew out here using a header barge. And they cut just the wheat off, and it goes in what they call a header barge that's like a hay wagon that has a high side on it that had like chicken wire on it, so that the heads wouldn't go overboard, and then they could just pull that up to the thrashing machine and fork it into the separator.
When did you see your first combine?
I would say in the late 30s, probably.
Now, did the combine take the place of the header and the binder and the thrasher?
Yes, the whole thing. I mean, that's, I think it was in the late 30s, probably when we had our first combine, so.
That paper we have upstairs, the first one came to Watonga in 1916, wasn't it?
Well, was that a combine?
The one upstairs, you know.
That's what I was wondering,
Gerke's.
Scott's?
Gerke's.
Oh, it was Gerke's. Well, I couldn't remember, but then, I mean, they weren't in general use very much until the 30s sometimes, but I'm sure there were some around, but we didn't have.
Ever have any prairie fires around here?
Well, not any real severe ones that I ever remember. I mean, any that covered any wide area that I'm familiar with. So.
Okay. When did you get married?
In 1930.
1930. Where'd you meet your husband?
Well, I was teaching school at Oakwood, and he was buying oil and gas leases over there, and we happened to eat at the same cafe.
And what was his name?
Buell Cronkite.
How long did you teach school?
I just taught about a little less than 5 years. Finished out the term.
Okay. And you started teaching after high school?
No, I had 2 years college.
2 years. Where did you go to college?
Northwestern State Teachers College it was then, at Alva.
Alva. Did you live on campus or did you board?
No, they had no living quarters on campus in those days, and I lived with an aunt and uncle that lived there.
Oh, their names.
It was Mr. and Miss Pat Treese, my mother's brother.
And what years did you go there?
1925 and 6 and 27 and 8, and then summer terms after that.
Okay.
Till I obtained a life certificate, which of course they no longer give.
Okay, who was head of the school when you were going there?
J.P. Battenberg.
J.P. Battenberg. What was he like?
Well, he was a very likable person. I think that maybe he left there not too long after I was away, but he was a good administrator. We all liked him.
Who was your favorite professor at Alva?
His name was Dr. If I can think of his name, Griffith was his name.
What did he teach?
He was in the science department. And he was a neighbor there, my uncle's. I think that was one reason I liked him very much. And then the Dean of Women was Minnie Shockley, and she also taught English there, and she was a favorite of mine.
When did you first meet Mrs. Ferguson?
Probably in 1930. See, that's when I came to Watonga, this area to live then.
Okay.
Probably the first time I met her.
So you and your husband moved to Watonga?
Well, we moved out to the ranch out by Romanos Park.
Mm-hmm.
Romanos Park used to be a part of our ranch.
Okay. That's a Cronkite Ranch?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Did your husband's family homestead this area?
No, they didn't homestead. They came here in the early days, but they weren't homesteaders. They bought out some homesteaders that areas and a lot of Indian land at different times.
When did they establish Roman Nose?
The park, we sold the original land for the park in 1935. I always remember because my husband brought the papers to the hospital for me to sign when our son was 3 days old, and he was born on May 23rd, 1935.
Mm-hmm. Why did they establish Roman Nose? What was the reason?
Well, they had, it was developed with CCC labor, and they had wanted that for a long time. So the the city of Watonga, of course, bought the land and then turned it to the State Parks Department for development. And it was developed by CCC labor.
Mm-hmm. What are the main features of Roman Nose?
Well, they have, of course, the lakes there, and then they have a lovely swimming pool, if you've ever been out there, and then picnic areas, and it was just a general recreation area, but it had kind of been a recreation area before because we'd had a lake out there and some cabins, and they used to come out there for picnics then, and it was just kind of a favorite recreation spot, and I think the big spring out there was the main attraction for their walking.
What do the natural features of the land look like?
Well, it's canyons, very rough land, but beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And then it has this spring that living water that flows through it all the time.
Is that good water in that spring?
It's a bit jiffy, but it's cold the year round, and the flow, the water never changes out there.
That's good. What kind of work does your husband do? Is he a rancher?
Rancher. Mm-hmm.
Tell me about when you first met Mrs. Ferguson.
Well, I think I used to meet her sometimes when we would come in to Watonga on Saturday night to eat and go to the picture show. And she used to eat sometimes at the same restaurant that we ate at. And she always noticed our children and visited with us about them and was always just real friendly.
What kind of person was she?
Well, she was a very highly intelligent person, but very nice, and she'd been through all the things with the pioneers, and also she was a very understanding person, and I always liked her very much, enjoyed her.
Did she talk about her days as being First Lady?
No, no, the only way that I've had any, connection with that has been through her book, They Carried the Torch. And yes, she tells, that most of what I know about Mrs. Ferguson, I have learned from that. But I did belong to some clubs that she belonged to, that have had that association.
Right.
But not a lot of other, just personal association.
Right. What kind of personality did she have?
Well, she was very friendly and outgoing.
Okay. When did she pass away?
In 19 What was that?
47.
It was in 47, but I've forgotten the date. I think it was December, but we
Yeah.
do have a
When did the governor pass away?
in 1921.
1921.
And I believe that was in February. I've forgotten the exact date, but anyway, it was 1921.
Died in February 14th, 1921,
Mhm.
and she December the 18th, 1947.
Okay.
Okay. How has Watonga changed since you've lived here?
Well, of course, it's modernized along with other things, and and well, of course, and then that one thing that has changed. We used to come to town, and there were Indians sitting on the streets in their blankets, and moccasins and so forth, and Indian men with their hair braided, and all this that you never see anymore. But they were always sitting on the streets along the sidewalk. But you don't see that anymore.
What kind of Indians were they?
Cheyennes and Arapahoes.
Okay. Did you know any of them personally?
Well, we knew, like the Romanos family that the park's named for, lived out there by us. My husband had grown up and played with those older Romanos kids, and we knew them personally.
Is that their family name, Roman Nose?
Mm-hmm.
What were they like?
Well, they were, they were just Indians. I can say they were friendly, but I said that the big problem was alcohol with them in later years, and still is. It does something to Indians that it doesn't do to anybody else. And several of them were alcoholics, and they were agreeable, nice people when they weren't drinking.
Does the family still live here in the area?
Well, there's some of the grandchildren still live here.
Okay. Are they Cheyenne? Okay. Tell me about the dust storms.
Well, I hate to even think about them, because they used to, and we'd see dust clouds coming like from the northwest. It was like a black cloud. A lot of times it would just roll in, and I mean, it was such fine dust that it sifted into the houses and all over everything, would practically choke you. I know that sometimes we had to hold damp cloths over our faces in order to breathe in some of those dust storms.
How long would a dust storm last?
Well, several hours. I don't know but they, rode along pretty fast. But a lot of those came from the Panhandle area and southeastern Colorado. A lot of that dust that rolled in here came from that far away. It was a different kind of dust than we have here.
Do you remember Black Sunday?
I don't.
That was in April of '36, I think, when they had a real bad dust storm.
Well, we had several pretty bad ones, but I don't know that I remember that specific date.
What caused the Dust Bowl?
Well, they seem to think that a lot of it was from they plowing up land that never should have been cultivated. That allowed the kind of land that never should have been cultivated.
How has ranching methods changed?
Well, of course, it's all mechanical now, and it's entirely different. At the time that we first farmed, it was a little horse-drawn equipment, very crude equipment. Of course, and now, of course, it's all big machines, and the farm, of course, and the farms are so much larger too that you don't have a neighbor in the next quarter of land like we used to have. So miss that.
Okay. What kind of cattle did you have on the ranch?
Well, we had a lot of times just regular stocker cattle, not irregular. And then later we had an Angus herd.
How big was the Cronkite Ranch?
Oh, about 2,000 acres originally, I'd say something like that.
In the Dust Bowl, would your husband do anything to try to save the topsoil?
Yes, and then he was instrumental in getting a lot of the shelter belts put in out in that area that helped to stop that. I think that was one of the things that helped to stop the shelter belts. And of course, we try to do strip farming like crops, and that's still used in sandy lands.
Would he do anything in particular to save the topsoil besides the shelter belts?
Well, and then just the methods that he would use in cultivation. So
what would he do?
From blowing. Well, as I say, strip farming. Some, they plant and leave one area, and then a lot of times I said when the sand, after they had planted their crops and they'd stop blowing, sometimes they almost blow out your crops. And they would use straw or old hay and try to put that on top of the soil to keep those spots from spreading, because if they were let go, they'd spread and take the entire field. But they had to do a lot of that. Or they would go in maybe with
Was your husband's family the first one to cultivate this land?
that it had been cultivated before they came here.
Okay.
I'm sure they broke some areas, but not all of it. Most of it had been broken before they came.
Most of the farming, when you first started, that was done by horse, by...
Well, not when my husband and I started farming, it was done with a tractor.
By tractor.
At that time.
Okay, when your family first moved here, did you farm with horses or mules?
Horses.
Horses. Ever use mules?
Yes, we had mules too. Horses and mules too.
Which were the best to work with, horses or mules?
Well, the mules were wiry and good to work with, but as a rule, they weren't as gentle as the horses.
Okay. What about World War II?
Well, of course, I remembered a little more about things that went on then, but...
Was there any work for the war effort in World War II?
Yes, there were lots with, we did like Red Cross work and this kind of things, the specifications that they sent out for that we tried to work with groups on that.
How many boys from Watonga went to the war?
I really don't know the number, and I don't know exactly where I'd find that record, but I'm not sure.
Okay. How did the Depression affect you and your family?
Just like it did everybody else. But I said that we had grown up by living at home, growing our own food and whatever, so I don't think really that we never went hungry, but we lived very economically, and it affected us all, I think, just pretty much the same.
Did many people go to California from this area?
Well, quite a few, but not a lot. I think most of those that went were from the eastern part of the state. Of course, there were a good many that went from here, but not. They didn't move out, and their farms weren't completely debilitated like they were in some of the eastern Oklahoma area.
Ms. Hankey, do you have any questions? Oh, I'd like to get some history of the house. Maybe you can, between
the two.
Yeah.
Well, about when it was, well, I'll tell you, who could give you the complete history of that was Ms. Max Shaw. That is, she didn't live here always, but she was the one that really got the, the restoration part
Yeah,
of it.
right.
But anyway, all I can tell you about when the house was built, according to to the Watonga Republic, it was built in 1901.
Was it built by Governor Ferguson?
Yes, See, the first few years after they came here, they lived in the back of their printing office. They brought the printing press for the Watonga Republic into Watonga in a covered wagon when they came here. And see, of course, that's still our county paper here. And it was the first few years they lived in the back of their printing office.
Did he make the run, Governor Ferguson?
He made the run down to Oklahoma City when they made the first one at that one.
89.
In 89. And then he didn't stay there long, went back to Kansas. And then he came down here when this was open for settlement. But see, that was not done by run. This was not taken by run. They came, but
there was a land run in 1892.
Well, this one was, it was the opening of the Cheyenne Arapaho country is when they came, but they didn't go like they did in these others and pick out a little land, but it was done by allotment. See, this was allotted to the Cheyenne Arapahoes. And after the allotments were all given out to the Cheyenne and Arapahoes, there was land left over. So then they let the white people come in and take this by allotments too. Well, I think they probably got maybe like city lots or something this way. Then later, Ms. Ferguson tells in her book, they went back to Kansas for a visit. And then, and this run of 1893 came up. The the Cherokee Strip was open. Well, he made the run then from the Kansas line down to Pond Creek, Oklahoma. It was called Round Pond then, and filed on a city lot. And she said they built a little house on it there. And then they came back to Watonga to run their paper and said that house was stolen and moved off the lot. And said they sold it in sold it that fall then. But that, anyway, he was instrumental in coming to two runs, but he didn't stay those times.
Why was he appointed territorial governor?
Well, according to most of what I was reading it in Mrs. Ferguson's book, she said that, of course, the governors were all appointed by the presidents, and usually they didn't serve very long because when the politics in the White House changed, when they handed that out as a political plum to somebody, and so they didn't serve very long. But when President Teddy Roosevelt asked if there wasn't one man in Oklahoma, because he'd asked for recommendations, said everybody in Oklahoma agreed it should be an Oklahoma man instead of a carpetbagger, someone that came in from another state. So anyway, someone had said, well, isn't there one man in Oklahoma that would be, be suitable for that office? And anyway, the delegation that had gone said, well, there was a red-headed editor in Oklahoma that was such a man, so he sent the telegram then to Mr. Ferguson to come to Washington to accept the appointment. And Ms. Ferguson said when the telegram came, that Mr. Ferguson was up to Hitchcock, putting out the weekly newspaper up there. Said that there was no way to contact him because he'd gone by horse and buggy and there were no telephones. And she said that it required an immediate reply. So she said, I want him to be governor, so I just answered. And she said, I told him that he'd be there on the first train. And she said, I went out and bought his railroad ticket, and I packed his traveling bag, and when he got home real late that evening, I had him ready to go. But she said, and when I showed him the telegram and told him what I'd done, he said that red hair really lit up. And he said, since you've answered without my consent, you just send him another telegram and tell him I don't want the job. But she said, you know, I haven't lived with that red-headed Scotsman all these years, not knowing how to manage a letter. And she said when the train left, he was on it. So,
With the train thing still on his hands.
yes. So, anyway, but I said, that's really all I know about is what I've read in her book.
Now, when he was governor, they lived in Guthrie?
Right.
Where did they live in Guthrie?
Well, she said that they had a little trouble living on the $3,000 a year salary because they had to pay their own house rent. They paid their own traveling expenses and their own entertaining expenses. And said had the Watonga Republican not been doing pretty well at that time, they'd have never made it. But, they had a rented house.
And after he was governor, they moved back to this house?
Right, they came back here.
Okay, who lived in the house while he was
Well,
lived in
Mr. and Mrs. Hooper lived in the downstairs. He was a druggist, his wife. They were pioneer drugstore people. And Dr. Tyler, who was the first lady dentist that ever came to Oklahoma in 1901, that year, just out of dental school. And she lived on the 3rd floor up here. There's a picture up there of her with her dental chair. And she practiced here. She was my dentist till she retired in 1941. But she was married.
Did she have any family still living here?
Yes, her son lives next door to me, and she has 2 sons and a daughter that still live here.
That'd be a good interview, I think.
Yes, it would. And I don't know which one of them. They're not any of them that are big talkers, but to interview them, it would be interesting.
Can you think of anything else?
Not really, can you?
No, really, I don't.
Well, I guess we have a good interview then. I was going to ask, how much of this furniture is original to the Ferguson family?
2 pieces upstairs in northwest bedroom.
Okay.
All the rest has been contributed.
Yeah.
The grandchildren have donated a lot of the things in the shell cases and the portraits.
Okay, thank you.
That burned down many years later, but it's gone now. But the whole family.
Your husband's grandfather?
His grandfather and.
What's his name?
Cronkite. His name was Bill Cronkite too.
Did any of your grandfathers or your husband's grandfather serve in the Civil War?
Now my grandfather, Treese, did.
What was
served
his
in the
name?
Civil War. Jesse Treese, covering Gap, Tennessee.
Did he ever talk about the war?
Well, you know, I was pretty small when he died. He was about 4 years old, but I know he was wounded. He had a knee that was wounded and had gangrene in it, you know, way back then. And I said that he was kind of crippled all through his life, you know. And I remember him. He died when I was about 4 years old. Of course, I didn't hear him talk about the war, but I've heard my grandmother talk about. She was a little girl at the time of the war, and she said that the soldiers used to come in and take their geese and their chickens and what have you, you know, and this because a lot of the men were gone to the war, and they just come in and take food, see, whatever they could gather up. And grandmother said when she was a little girl that these soldiers were out gathering up all their chickens and geese and had them tied and put in sacks over the backs of their horses. And so my grandmother said that her mother told her to go out and ring the dinner bell. That's where they called the men in to work. So my grandmother was a little girl, and she went out and rang the dinner bell and said these soldiers left the chickens and everything. They said they had hidden most of their food in, they lived close to the edge of the Cumberland Mountains and in a cave up there. So they hid some of their things there.
Which side did they fight on?
Well, my grandfather Treese, I didn't know until in later years, fought on the Union side. But he ran away from home. He wasn't old enough to sign up, to go and join the Union Army. But he didn't sign under his own name. He used his mother's maiden name. So, and then when my grandfather there, one of my cousins had a copy of the permit that his father had to get to go to see him in the hospital when he was, after he'd been wounded, had to get a special permit to go because he didn't have the same name.
Yeah.
They weren't going to let him go. And I wish I knew where that copy was. That cousin died. I don't.
You remember,
It said that your husband's grandfather helped settle the town of Hitchcock.
Well, he was, I found on the Watonga Republican a little sign up there on the microfilm upstairs. It said 3 Hitchcock men started the town of Hitchcock. I mean, 3 men. One was from Guthrie and one was from Loyal, Keel was then, and I've forgotten where the other one was from. But they had they helped to start the town of Hitchcock. So,
Who was it named after? Town of Hitchcock.
he was a senator, I think, a United States senator.
And you said they moved the store from Hitchcock?
No, they moved it from Kiel.
Oh.
They changed the name to Loyal during World War I, see, because of the German name. And moved it in sections. That was in the Pioneer News, one time, not too long ago, and I saved the picture and they told the story of it.